Hello and welcome, everyone. It's good to have you here with us. I'm actually not going to do our official opening, but my name is Jody Geddes, and I will actually pass it to Rhonda from California Black Health Network, our partners for this event, and they've been our partners for a really long time. So I'm excited that they accepted the invitation to do something together and to bring you this amazing panel of speakers. With that being said, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Rhonda.
Yeah. Always a joy and a pleasure working with you, Jody, and the folks at RJOY. And my name is Rhonda Smith. I'm the Executive Director of the California Black Health Network. And we are excited to partner with RJOY today and have you all be part of this important conversation. But before I go any further, I have to say happy belated Juneteenth. Hopefully all of you were off yesterday and had a day to feel free to do whatever you wanted to do and spend it however you wanted to do it and felt in terms of what you felt like doing. So this month, there's quite a few things to celebrate and uplift. Besides Juneteenth, June is also Pride Month. June is also Men's Health Awareness Month, and we know how important it is for our Black men to take care of themselves because we want them around for a very long time. And so we wanted to talk about an important issue in our community and how it impacts us across the board. And so sometimes it's difficult just being who we are and going about our daily lives, being who we are and living our lives. And we know that sometimes we need some support and or just have somebody to talk to. And so today is really focused on the intersectionality of mental health. And we've got three amazing speakers that Jody will tell you more about that I'm excited to hear from today too on this important topic. So I won't take up that much more time. I really wanted to say hello, welcome, looking forward to the conversation. I see some familiar names here that people I haven't seen in a while. So welcome and happy Thursday. So Jody, you can take it from here.
And thank you so much, Rhonda. And I'll also say shout out to Astrid, who I believe is on vacation right now. I'm kind of putting you on blast, but I think I saw your name pop into the room. So just shout out to Astrid as well and Rhonda's team and the support that they put into also promoting this event. And so as we delve into the intersectionality of Black mental health, and I know this is a panel and I know this is an event, but we're going to start in like the restorative justice fashion. We're actually going to start with some breathing. And so I'll invite you to just do an inhale. And when you exhale, I also invite you to release a sigh. One of my favorite authors, Claudia Rankine, talks about the power of the sigh. And there's a way that our breath sends us messages. And in a world where there is so much going on in our lives, but also beyond us, right? And it can be hard to understand that the breath might often be telling us messages to slow down and to take moments of stillness, or maybe sometimes your breath is telling you to speed up, honey. So in this moment, I just invite you to close your eyes. You can also leave them open. All of this is an invitation, not an obligation. And to just take a moment and I just invite you to inhale and release a sigh. And inhale. Okay. And release a sigh. And the intention of this isn't to quiet your mind and everything around you, to maybe become more aware than you were before. All that is in your body, all that is in your community, and just listen to it. And I'll invite you to inhale with me deeply one more time. And sigh. And just thank you, everyone. And I invite you to also do that in your daily life, just to really think about, just what are the messages that your breath is sending you? And to just take a moment of pause and see, it doesn't have to be a 10-minute, 15-minute, 20-minute meditation. And you don't have to be some kind of guru, just thinking about the gift that your body offers you, by just being able to breathe. So once again, my name is Jody Geddes. I'm the Safe Outside the System Program Director at Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth. And I'm so excited to be here with you and to bring you this event about the intersectionality of Black mental health. And I'm also really grateful that I get to be in community with all of these amazing speakers, and I'm going to be spotlighting them for you today. And so I'm just going to jump right into people's bios. I might not read the whole thing and just say a bunch of additional words, because if you know me, that is how I move. And so I'm going to actually pin our first speaker, Dr. Jalicia Jolly, that I'm so excited that she's here with us today. Dr. Jalicia Jolly is a writer, a poet, and a reproductive justice organizer. She's also an associate professor in American Studies and Black Studies at Amherst College. She merges community-based research on Black women's health, grassroots activism, and political leadership with restorative justice organizing and practice in the United States and the Caribbean. Shout out to my Jamaican sister. We both come from the same island. I want to also uplift that. Dr. Jolly is the founder and director of Black Feminist Reproductive Justice and HIV and AIDS Activism Collective. And it is a new interdisciplinary medical humanities lab that bridges research, advocacy, student collaborations, and high impact learning experiences on the health and movement building of Afro-diasporic girls, women, and gender diverse people. She is invested in research-informed political action, and this leads her commitment to justice and joy as her core intention, while centering new legacies of equity and community care beyond inequity and violence. I also want to name that this has been a passion of Dr. Jolly since high school. We both did a lot of sexual health education that wasn't just about sexual health in terms of our body, but really thinking about our minds and our spirits. And so it's really beautiful to see this work continue and to hear about all of the research and incredible work that she has been doing. So I want to be able to uplift something that I've seen really grow over 10 years. And then our next speaker that we're actually going to go ahead and introduce is Charles Anderson, who leads our Cutie Pox Circle here at Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth. Charles Anderson is a Los Angeles native, passionate about personal and professional development, encouraging positive change in those within his community. He studied Africana Studies at San Diego State University, and as I said before, is currently the Cutie Pox Circle Keeper at RJOY and co-facilitator of Black Connect at the Oakland LGBTQ Center. And I see Jesse is with us today, so thank you, Jesse. And we uplift and amplify the work of the Oakland LGBTQ Center. And Charles's vision is to continue contributing his knowledge and passion by supporting causes that align with his values. He has served as a president of the Urban League of San Diego County Young Professionals Chapter and NULYP Western Region Vice President, NULYP Programs Committee Member, NULYP Leadership Training Development Committee Member, Chapter Advisor for the San Diego NAACP Youth and College Chapter. And so we're super excited to have Charles with us today. Charles is someone that I know is committed to collaboration, and I see that all the time in his work with RJOY and our Cutie Pox Circle. And so thank you again, Charles, for really being with us. And it's great to have you in community and to have you participate in this conversation. And so our third speaker, Maximus, or who I call Max, is a student director at Oakland Unified School District, and he sits on the Board of Education, and he has been doing restorative justice for over 3 years. And Max is currently a junior in high school and a former RJOY intern. So for those of you wondering Max's age, he is 16 years old and actually previously served as a part of the panel at a Coming to the Table. Give me a moment, I'm on a call. At the Coming to the Table National Gathering. And so grateful to Max and others for being here with us today. And so thank you again to our speakers. Okay, we'll get you Zuma. And for those of you wondering who this beautiful young lady is, this is my daughter Cielo, who also, I guess, be co-facilitating. And so as we say, we flow like water in the work of restorative justice. And so thank you again to our three amazing speakers for being here with us. I want to name that we're going to offer them some questions, but we also invite you to drop questions in the chat. And so while they will be likely talking about the work that they do around restorative justice and reproductive justice and so many other themes, we're also inviting our speakers to share who they are and to bring their lives forth. And so with that being said, I read a little bit of your bio, but a question that I really like to ask the folks is, who are you and what brings you joy? And so who are you and what brings you joy? And I'm actually going to pass it over to Dr. Jolly. And if you want me to call you Jaleesi, I'll also do that. But I'll pass it over to Dr. Jolly to go ahead and share with us, who are you and what brings you joy?
So it is an absolute pleasure to be here. Please call me Jaleesi or Jody. And thank you so much for co-organizing this amazing event. And just for bringing us all together to really have this important conversation that I think is so crucial on the heels of Juneteenth as we enter an election cycle and just as we navigate everyday life while dealing with multiple terrors as well as multiple pathways and possibilities to healing and justice. So I really appreciate this space. Who am I? And what brings me joy? So I'm Jaleesi Alicia Jolly. I'm Kingston born and Brooklyn bred. I'm the daughter of Suzette McLeod, who's a Jamaican immigrant and was a single mother of four, who grew us up in Brooklyn, and she's been a home health care worker for 30 years. I'm also the granddaughter of Patrona Harris, who's a Jamaican immigrant and single mother of six. Oh, she was a union organizer and a home health care worker for over 4 decades. I'm someone who's inherited their legacies of health justice, of grassroots organizing. They were my first sort of introductions to Black and Caribbean feminism and reproductive justice before I even knew the term. They practiced and organized around these principles. And I really get the honor of walking within and building upon this legacy currently as a professor now in Black Studies and American Studies, where I write, research, and teach, as Jody shared, on Black women's health and reproductive justice organizing, our political leadership, our social movements in the US and the Caribbean. And I'm also someone who straddles the worlds of academia, grassroots work, community voice-based spaces in my role as co-chair of Birth Equity and Justice Massachusetts, to really think about how we drive equity in reproductive care and maternal health policy and elevate the experiences of Black women and birthing people throughout the state and beyond. What brings me joy is my daughter, seeing her curiosity. She's 3 years old. Her name is Rose. What brings me joy is my family. What brings me joy is spoken word poetry and just being able to elevate Black voices and stories in multiple different contexts. And yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Jaleesa. Would anyone else like to jump in? What brings you joy and who are you? I'll pass it over to either Charles or Max. You know, you all can choose who goes next.
I can go. It was interesting. I was like processing like what brings me joy. And I'm gonna be honest, like my alone time. I think sometimes just being in community, which I would say the other part that brings me joy, it's like I'm so grateful and thankful to be among some amazing people. Like, for example, my Juneteenth, I was at a simple brunch, and just to be amongst proximate people, like we're all striving towards being the best version of ourselves. And just like the Bible says, like iron sharpens iron. So just being in a space where we could be each other's mirrors. So that in my alone time.
Thank you, Charles. Pass it over to Max.
All right, so hey everybody, I'm Maximus. It's nice to meet you guys. So who am I? I feel like, honestly, when people ask me who am I really don't know. You know, I really don't know. And that's for a lot of reasons, because I really feel like I change myself every day, all the time. And I'm not the same person who I was from yesterday off of everything that I've learned and everything that I've seen over the years. So I feel like I'm everything and nothing at the same time. So really, what brings me joy is I'm not even gonna say a whole bunch of big words, but really just helping people, seeing people prosper, seeing people thrive other than myself. I feel like I come from a long line of really powerful women that put others before themselves. So I really love to see people thrive. A lot of people in my family are doctors. My granny was the CEO of Highland Hospital, and my uncle and my auntie are neurosurgeons. So I really love helping people, and I really love doing everything I can to help people, and that's really what brings me joy.
Ashe, ashe, ashe. Thank you all just for those really thoughtful responses. And I just think it's always beautiful to ask that question, even in the midst of reflecting on maybe harms and traumas that got us to even a celebration called Juneteenth and so many other things that we celebrate and we commemorate. And I also feel like I learned new things. So thank you all for sharing that. The next question that we really want to ask folks is to think about, what were your first messages about mental health and wellness? And I'll say one of the ways that this question emerged is I was doing a circle, a Black women's circle that RJOY hosts every Monday. And as folks were sharing, I began to recognize the messages that they received, I also received, although I maybe felt like I hadn't received any messages before because maybe who it was coming from. And so I really started to rethink what my messages were around mental health and where it came from. And so I would really just like to ask speakers, what were your first messages about mental health and wellness? And so I'll give you a moment to think about that. And if you feel like Spirit is already giving you some answers and some thoughts, feel free to unmute and jump right in about what your first messages around mental health and wellness were.
I'm happy to jump in here. So for me, I think, I won't say propaganda, but I think some of the messaging was like mental health is important and all that. But I think there was a lack of like, okay, well, how does one put that into practice? And I can say what I'm very honored to be part of RJOY was like to can take these concepts, these principles, and how to apply them. And so I would even say, like, again, the importance of being in community was I was even as I'm like talking and interacting with other people, also seeing what are the best practices that people were able to implement for themselves and then do it for myself. And I live, full transparent, we're all family. I remember I had a very interesting episode recently, but I'm thankful that I was able to lean into peers like Jesse, like you, Jody, other people, my own circle participants to help guide me in like referring to resources and reframing new ways of thinking. So to answer to respond back to the question, like I heard the messaging on the large society scale, like, oh, it's important. But again, it was community who helped me to figure out how to apply it to myself.
Thank you, Charles. Anyone else? That self-care is community care, as community care is also self-care.
Yeah, I love this question. I think it prompted me to think about how the first messaging was laced with a lot of trauma and imposed stereotypes, but then also how the current messaging and practice is has been inverted to think more about self and community care and honor our humanity. I would say my first messaging, just to be quite honest, the messaging as well as the messaging of the people that sort of adhered to this messaging around me was that you approach struggle and challenges and overcome all stressors with silence, right? Like your ability and capacity to overcome is somehow the measure of your strength and humanity. I grew up with single mothers, and the stereotype of the strong Black woman, which goes back to, histories and centuries, was certainly something that that definitely shaped kind of, how folks approach their own humanity. And I also want to acknowledge how the oppressive systems and problematic anti-human material conditions that folks had to rear and bear and children in also made it a problematic to kind of think of mental health and wellness in that phase. So I think shifting through that, we were able to kind of access tools and also just experiences and resources to be able to understand that, yeah, like honoring our humanity is so central to our to wellness, and that wellness isn't a luxury, right? Even if you are, materially poor and have to work that seven days a week in order to provide basic resources. And so I think shifting from that lens, it was very clear that even if the messaging generationally was one way, there were always those grassroots care networks, those, intergenerational forms of survival, right? Those very intentional ways of pouring into each other, of relying on like community care, of thinking about reciprocity, of thinking about shared community childcare, of leaning onto your village, right? Even through silences and beyond them. So while, so it's intention and tandem. Those messaging was conflicting with the ways in which we could honor our full humanity, but navigating life and love and, raising Black children within anti-Black worlds, while also holding the fact that even through that, there was still these sort of avenues, these legacies, these inheritances that reminded us that there was a different way to honor our humanity and to live in relational intimacy with each other and not replicate the oppressive systems that subjected us to these very problematic ways of viewing our wellness and our mental health.
Thank you for that intersectionality. I'm going to pass it to Max and then I'll loop us back around because I also have some thoughts and I think it's a good place for us to sit for a moment. I'll pass it over to you, Max.
So I come from a family who suffered from a lot of mental illnesses. My granny suffered from dementia for a long time in the late stages of her life. But honestly, my first message about mental health was really my own message, and my own experiences with, honestly, depression. Because a lot of people don't like to use the word depression, but it's really a scale. You know what I mean? It's a spectrum. It can go from really bad to not that bad. It can go from just sad to really depressed. So I feel like, I come from what I would say a single mom. I didn't really get close with my dad and really start talking to him until I was about 12 years old. So for a long time, it was just me and my mom. And her having to work and provide for me, she wouldn't be in the house a lot. So I would be home alone. And me being a very social person, I'm not good alone. I like to talk, I like to socialize with people. And me being alone with my thoughts, it got me really in tune with my emotions, and I could really get to understand myself, but it would also leave me alone by myself. So I get really sad. And what I had would be called clinical depression because it started messing with my way of life. I didn't really want to get out of bed. I didn't want to eat. I didn't even go to school sometimes, And my mom has always seen me as someone who's really independent and someone who can make decisions for myself. So if I feel like I shouldn't go to school, she won't really fight me on it. If I feel like I shouldn't really be doing something, she won't really fight me on it unless it's really necessary. So for a long time, I was very depressed from being alone. But figuring that out and seeing where I was, I've always been someone I don't really like to lose myself. I could see myself losing. I could see me losing myself and I like to jump back out of it, but it was really hard to jump back out of it. So one day, I'm just like, all right, well, I need to do something about this. I don't want to be stuck in the house, I need to socialize with people. So for me, working out and being really active helped me. And like, even furthermore from that, just meditating, I never really tried meditation before that, but meditation really helped me. And some people say it's a form of therapy. I would say it's a form of therapy because while meditating, you're going to the root of the problem, and you're going back to what happened, and you're just putting yourself in that space over and over again and finding out different ways to cope with it, which is a lot what therapy does. So for me, just being able to start a new routine daily and not laying in bed all day. Just being able to start back a new routine that I had before I was in that spot really helped me get to where I was. So that was my first message.
I would say thank you, Max, for opening the space and sharing it with us. Like, it's 52 people, right? And all of you, like, we bring ourselves into this space. And I don't think that's an easy thing in a world that I feel like says, show me who you are. And then also tries to take away people's humanity and dignity when they do. And so I really appreciate all of you just sharing and what you just shared, Max, as like a young person that I also see as very fully capable and highly intelligent. And so just thank you once again for sharing that with us. Before I pass it over to Charles, I name the circle that I mentioned before that has really brought me to this question is, in the Black women's circle, other folks are sharing, and for folks who are Caribbean, you might recognize this. We joke about tea all the time. So like if you have a broken arm, we'll say like your mom is gonna like give you tea. If you're sick, you drink tea. If you're sad, you drink tea. Like there's a way that I grew up with tea as a part of my daily routine and didn't see it as medicine. And now we live in a world where people are like mixing different herbs together to formulate their own teas and concoctions. And so really shifting my thoughts around wellness and how in my home, I often, this is coffee this morning because I need it, but I'm often making tea, and to really honor even the ritual and the practice of understanding tea with, you know, sometimes a little bit of milk, you know, is a part of a wellness practice. That when my mom makes her tea first thing in the morning and has it with her breakfast, and my aunties do that, or you offer people tea in the house, like that is an introduction into wellness. It is a moment of stillness. It's a moment of slowing down, and the very reality of when people are taking from their land, and those traditional herbs and practices often are separated and taken from them. And so like, I just really want to name that, to think about just that there were these things that I grew up with that I saw as kind of weird family and Caribbean culture, and that it was a practice of wellness that I didn't really have to pay for. It was just there ingrained in the historical lineage of my family and of my country. And so that was just an example of a practice of wellness that I had not realized as a wellness practice, like what it means to even steep the tea and to get it like out at the perfect moment, and the beauty that's held within that. So I really wanted to just uplift that as well. And with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Charles and of course the whole panel to see if there are any additional reflections.
It's funny, Jordan, when you mentioned the whole tea thing, it makes me think about the relationship African Americans have with ginger ale. Like I remember growing up, oh, how's your stomach? Or Bob, whatever, like, get some ginger ale, go lay down. But I want to respond to the share regards to mental health, or like wellness and honoring the humanity part, which I really, really appreciate, because it seeing people from the like all the layers. And it reminds me of a conversation I was part of last week. We were talking about mental health, and the topic of resilience and grit came up. And I just want to put this in the space, and I'm curious what other people's are. I hate that word. And I hate it because I feel like the onus is on the person who's like experienced the stress, like them, they just get through it. And I think there's an opportunity, well, how do we improve the environment in the space so we don't have to do all these different just in a space where like the stresses are reduced. So in the topic of intersectionality, I think there's an overlap between social justice and wellness. So like, how do we remove the barriers to peace and wellness?
Thank you. And I want you all to think about that, right? Like when you hear resilience and someone shares that with you, either about you're so resilient, or, you know, some people, you know, Black people are resilient. There's a whole conversation about that. I want you all.
Or you're so strong. Like, I don't want to have to be strong.
Yeah, to think about that.
I just want to say that I really appreciate you saying that, because I think I cringe when I hear resilience. I was like, don't use that word to describe me. And I cringe when I see it in the research literature. I cringe when I see, you know, people co-opt our narratives and use that. I cringe when I just hear it being used against Black children, Black people, because I do think in many ways it's used to justify all the barriers and systemic failures without necessarily diagnosing the root causes, right? And when you don't diagnose the root causes create more enabling conditions for people to not just survive but thrive, you abdicate responsibility from basically the oppressors, right? Like, and what it does is now you have some essentially, you know, magical Negroes who are somehow thriving without necessarily thinking about the ways in which the material conditions, the structural conditions and the limitations really undermine our quality of life on an everyday basis, right? And so I really appreciate the pushback against resilience, not just theoretically, but also in practice and ways of how we're thinking about mental health and wellness.
Thank you all for that. I think that comes so much into the conversation right now that we're having around reparations. This is not that panel, but there will be one about that, the conversation around reparations, right? And that what is seen as strength and resilience and triumph and survival for communities across the diaspora often then means that those who have benefited the most will utilize that as a reason for reparations not to be honored and for reparations not to be possible, right? That the very survival and existence of Black folks across the diaspora then becomes an argument used to refute the necessity of reparations, and also leaves reparations only to a space of money, although I would say cut the check. But there's also many other ways that reparations can be possible. I think about like the Chicago Torture Justice Center that also brings in mental health and wellness into the reparations framework. And so that's just another thought that's also coming to mind, the way that that language can then be weaponized as a way for accountability not to be present. And I think that's something that Charles is speaking to. And so once again, like as speakers and, you know, these panelists move through these questions, I also want you to think about what joy looks like in your own life. I want you to think about the messages that you received also around mental health and wellness, because it's not just about hearing from others, but also reflecting on your own journey and how that impacts the ways that you show up in the world, or maybe sometimes choose not to show up in certain spaces. And so I want to bring us back to that as well. I think where we're going, and as folks are sharing, actually brings us to this question, really around kind of stigma, right? And the stigma around mental health and wellness, right? And how the messages that we receive is a part of that. And so I actually want to ask this question around, where do you see challenges to addressing mental health and wellness, either in your community or even in your own personal life? That where do you see the challenges to addressing mental health and wellness? Where do you see the challenges? And anyone, of course, and always feel free to jump in and respond to that as well.
I can start this time. So I believe, not even I believe, I don't really like saying I believe, but I know a lot in the African American community that we don't trust at all, and we don't really trust a lot, and it's honestly, we're not really ready to receive help from a lot of people because of everything we've been through. It's just hard for us to trust as a community, and it's hard for us to let people in because we've been stabbed in the back so many times throughout history, throughout our lives. It's just very hard for us to let people in. It's very hard for us to receive trust from people, to receive from people. So honestly, when people in our community, when we see that our healthcare workers don't look like us, our counselors don't look like us, our therapists don't look like us, it's very hard for us to listen to them because they don't actually know what it is to be in our shoes and what we've gone through as people. And it's the same thing in schools. When we don't see teachers that look like us, it's kind of like, well, you can say that you know how it is to most of the time only have a mom in the house, or have your brothers looking after you, or your sisters looking after you. You can say that, and you can give me extension on my paper, but you don't honestly know how it feels to be going through all of that at home and still have to go back to school and deal with all the pressure that's put on you. So I honestly, that's really where I see the challenges to address mental health, because we don't have anybody in positions to help us looking like us. So I believe if we want to address mental health in our community, we have to start within our community. And we have to be willing to receive help, and we have to be willing to talk to each other, and we have to be willing to trust. But you have to be, honestly, it sounds stupid, but you just have to be willing to ask a friend to lend you an ear if you ever need it. You know, you have to be willing to ask sometimes. And it sounds easy talking about it, but it's really not. You know what I mean? Because a lot, I feel like, especially for Black males growing up, you're taught not to ask for help, not to show your emotions, not to cry, not to do any of this because it's weak. And to be a provider, you can't be weak. You have to be able to provide for your family and not complain. You have to be able to come home from work, do all of this. And especially for Black women, you have to be able to especially with Black women that's providing for a family, you have to be able to come home from work, cook for your kids, entertain your kids, and you can't go to sleep until all this is done. And you're not expected to complain or shout or cry or do any of that, because that's what's normal now. It's what's normal, and people don't understand that. So it becoming a norm, it's basically saying that all the mental health issues that come with that aren't really irrelevant. They're not relevant. So all the stress and anxiety and PTSD that comes from all of this, it's not relevant anymore, because it's become such a norm in our community for stuff like this to happen, that it's not seen to be worth addressing, you know? So that's why I see the issue within it. And we can't make that a norm anymore. We have to make sure that we see these problems, and we're able to address them. And honestly, the window that I see is just asking for help and being able to talk to each other.
So, Jody, I see that Tiffany has a question, and Charles also has his hand up.
Yeah, I got it. Thank you. I'm gonna pass it over to Charles, and then I'll loop back, because that was our final question of this part before opening it up. So feel free to continue actually dropping these gems in the chat and any questions. And Max, I really, really appreciate what you just shared. And I also don't think it's stupid, right? Like sometimes it is that listening ear that shifts everything for somebody in the trajectory of their life. And so even for other folks, if you want to put on the ear of a friend, or maybe even a stranger, because, you know, I'm from New York, so sometimes strangers be talking on the train and you never see them again, but it's the best conversation you've had all year, you know? So really thinking about the power of asking for a listening ear, and that it's not stupid, but I think it's something that's powerful. So thank you for sharing that with us. And also just that often how there's a way that Black men have been taught and don't always have spaces where they can share with each other. And I think about the Black male circle at RJOY that Malachi opened up. Malachi is on this call. I think he's still here, that Malachi holds as a collective, and how that circle really came forth because he wanted to do it. This was before we got this contract with Alameda County Behavioral Health to do healing circles. Malachi was like, I want to have this circle. And it's our longest running circle. And it is such a powerful space where men and boys feel a lot of ownership and get to be in community with each other and just get to be. And just thinking about the power of that space always just blows my mind. I'm always in awe, and that it is still going, whether or not Malachi as a circle keeper is present. And I think that says something about people feeling like they are a part of the creation of the space, and it's not just a space that's being led for them. And so naming that these spaces exist, and that you can also create those spaces in your friend group and your community. And it doesn't mean that it's not going to be, it's not going to be hard, but that's just another opportunity. So I wanted to be able to name and amplify that. And with that being said, I'm actually going to go ahead and pass it over to Charles before we open it up to the rest of the folks that are on this call with us. So I'll pass it over to you, Charles.
Well, thank you. So a lot came up for me in regards to this one. So join me on this mental roller coaster. But I want to say I really appreciate what Matt shared in regards to the trust part. And I would say in response to that, I think even before like trust in community, I think society and the propaganda where we're encouraged not to even trust ourselves and trust our intuition, trust our inner voice. Where I know there's been multiple times for myself, I'll like feel or think something and it was like, oh, that's just something. And I like try to diminish it, but realizing like, no, this is like a genuine concern. To even in my most recent episode, like I shared, like I remember I was talking to a best friend and she was like, those are not healthy thoughts. You should probably go talk to someone. And it was like, oh, you don't have these same thoughts? Like, no, Charles, you should go talk to someone. So again, again, learning to trust yourself, trust your inner voice, trusting your community, trust those people around you. But to respond to the question, I think also comes back to language. I know something I'm dismantling, divorce myself, certain like frameworks. So like being as a Black male, I have to work twice as hard to get half the other communities. That doesn't have to be my reality. Or so other like notions and parables, I think that are like unintentionally inherited. I'm learning to like release that. Also like, I think that also understanding there are resources and making sure I understand how to navigate this. So again, learning how to trust yourself, learning like you don't have to subscribe to everything, you know, that's, I guess, community proverbs, I guess the best way to explain that. And also just learning that there are resources and learn how to access them.
Ashe, thank you, Charles. I'm going to pass it over to Jalicia before I open it up to our full group of 55 people that are here with us to also share their thoughts and their reflections.
Sorry, yeah, I thought we were going to open up. I was so thrilled to see what people are writing in the chat, as well as kind of the direction we would go in the Q&A. So I just want to say I really do appreciate this conversation. I love the emphasis on, the need for Black people to trust each other. I appreciate that emphasis on how we can be in better wellness trajectories by being able to trust each other and show up for each other in that way. And I also want to acknowledge that I absolutely understand why distrust happens within the institutions that we have to interface with, right? The medical, the healthcare, the public health, all of that, insert, et cetera, the clinical spaces and beyond, social welfare agencies. Like, I understand why distrust happens. And so I want to normalize Black people's distrust of skeptical systems that are designed against our wellness and well-being, and our families and communities living in sustainable communities and conditions. And I want to acknowledge that absolutely, we must do that work of figuring out how we can create safety within our spaces in order to deepen that trust. And I am very much encouraged by the community-based interventions that are culturally respectful, sensitive, inclusive, and that really are addressing the root causes of distrust and of this violence, right? I'm encouraged by the care-centered approaches that prioritize mental health and survivor justice resources. And I'm really encouraged by safety pods, right, as tools to really think about preventing harm, violence, emergency, and crisis, but also how we can ground our efforts in trust-based relationships to enhance the conditions of our inner beings as well as our communities. So I just want to note that in our lived practice of care, of mutual aid, of community accountability, right, that is within a rich tradition of Black community self-defense, as well as Black feminist values of care, like conflict resolution, meeting our basic needs, emergency preparedness, looping in our skill building and skill exchange in order to literally create the worlds that we need for ourselves and our children and our kinfolk and families. That this is absolutely happening within the threats and very real terrors to our lives every day. So it's both and, right? Thank you.
Ashe, always shout outs to the both and, which is what's needed. Thank you all so much for those gems. I'm actually going to go ahead and pass it over to Tiffany. And then if anyone else has any questions or anything you would like to offer, feel free to raise your hand or drop it in the chat as Rhonda wrote. So I'm going to unpin our speakers and then I'm going to pass it over to Tiffany Law to see if there's anything that you would also like to share with us.
Hi, everyone. This is my first time in this group. I am loving the energy. It is so beautiful to be around people who just freaking get it. But I was going to kind of put out there because I was listening to Max's conversation or his what he was saying, and basically I had thought about my own journey with mental health, and the first person that I was really speaking to, a continuous therapist, was a white trans individual, and how when it comes to intersections of identity, you see someone, they have an intersection, a very clear one, whether it's, and it doesn't, I'm just sorry, I'm trying to find words right now, but essentially, you find that the intersections are not the same when it's not a racial intersection versus when it is another marginalized population, and how that can be incredibly detrimental. So I received my diagnosis from my mental health professional, and once I switched to a different one that was a Black woman, she's like, you don't have that. You are just reacting to the trauma that's being thrown at you. That's not what this is. And it was so clearing because I don't think a lot of people outside of the marginalizations that we live in, where everything is so greatly scrutinized as a Black woman, I cannot get mad, or I am off the handle crazy, right? I cannot have a negative experience with someone, or I am just lying for attention, or I'm making it a bigger deal. It's all these little weird nuances. So for someone to be like, yes, you're just reacting to trauma, anyone would react that way. You're not being insane. You're not doing anything outside of the norm of what people usually do, was so gratifying. And learning that I have a completely different diagnosis just because a Black woman looked at me, it was so clearing. So I would always encourage people to find mental health professionals that look like you, even if they're not Black. If you're Latina, if you are Indigenous, find someone who looks like you, because they're going to put it through the filter of this is what happens to our people. And it is a very common, understandable reaction to that happening versus like, this is happening to you and you're acting a little weird because my populations, my people would never ever do something like that, because they're not used to it or they're not having to deal with it. So that was kind of just my 2 cents.
Tiffany, thank you for sharing that with the full group. Like you said, this is your first time. That's the first time us hosting this particular webinar, so, or panel, event, whatever you want to call it. So thank you for also being, just stepping forward and sharing your story and sharing that experience. I also note for folks, there are resources that we'll share up in the follow-up email, both across from our speakers, but if there are any resources that you want us to share, I acknowledge that everyone isn't in the Bay Area. I even think my auntie's on here, y'all. But I acknowledge that even if you're not in the Bay Area, still share those resources and we can put it out. I'm also going to share some resources around finding kind of mental health practitioners within your area that are also culturally diverse. There's been a lot of growth in that area. So I'll also uplift and share those resources. And so I know folks are probably like, I want to know more. I want to know more. So drop your resource link in the chat and we'll also share things that our panelists have mentioned, like even some of the things around like safety planning and safety mapping. There's a lot of resources on that Jalicia spoke to. So I'll also share that as well. So I want to be able to uplift that. Don't feel like if you're not taking notes fast enough that you'll miss it. Those are resources that we'll also share in the chat. So thank you all for that. And I'm going to go ahead and actually pass it over to Charles.
I want to say thank you so much, Tiffany, for sharing. It reminded me of something I want to like add to the conversation of making sure you're clear on who your community is and what community you identify with. I know for me, as a self-identified Black gay man, I know in certain spaces people can make their assumptions, and they have to be clear. Like especially where I'm in like queer space, I'm like, no, I'm not queer. I'm a gay Black man, and like yes, we use these terms like a repression and all this, but like we all experience these things differently, and making sure when we are having these conversations we can be with like-minded individuals to really get specific on how to respond in a healthy way. So I just want to put that out there, making sure get clear on who your community, what community you identify with.
Thank you, Charles, for sharing that. Once again, thank you all for your reflections and acknowledging all of the beautiful reflections that also came up in the chat, especially around language. And I think we need to continue holding and having spaces to think about how we talk about ourselves and how we talk about ourselves in relationship to the world. So just thank you all for just the reflections. As I'm speaking, I'm also just rolling through the chat. So I encourage you all to just really tap in and read some of the things that are coming up in the chat. I think that they're all just beautiful. And I would love to, of course, later on, maybe I've been talking about all the different webinars we're going to host every time someone says something. We could have one about language and access to language and how that puts some of us in certain spaces and also separates some of us out of other spaces, holding the yes and, right? Thinking about the world that we want to create and the reality of the one that we're living in and how we're constantly moving in between those spaces. And I'll also say that before I got on, Jalicia and I were talking, and one of the things that she asked me is like, for this event, what does success look like? And what I said is I want people to feel something. I want people to feel challenged. I want people to feel held. And I saw someone already identifying how they felt. So like, look at spirit, like, girl, here you go. But really just thinking about at Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth and in partnership with CBHN, have an opportunity where I'm in spaces where I'm encouraged to feel and I'm constantly leaning in, and there's a container held for me to be able to lean in, and that everyone doesn't have access to the space that I have. And so whether it's a webinar or a circle in person, how do I create a container for people to know that all of who they're bringing is important, right? And it might feel hard to do, but we have this amount of time. So the first 30 minutes, you're probably like softening up. And then by the hour, you're like, I'm all in, right? And I just want to be able to name that, in this moment, I hope it's been an opportunity for you to be able to reflect and to lean in and to be able to, just ask questions. And once again, recognizing that the space I have where I can be at work and during a check-in circle, say like, I'm not feeling it today. that there is power in that there are ways in which people have to constantly suppress and bury the ways that they're really feeling. And I think that's something that Max spoke to. And I get to be at an organization where it really holds me. And of course, I would love to still hear from folks. The last thing I'll say, I think about when I was becoming a parent and how, you know, after my first few, I guess, months, that RJOY held a circle for me, right? It's not just about the work that we do outside, but the work we do inside. They're like, how are you doing? It wasn't just about the baby, because once you give birth, people forget about you, but you know, that's a whole other conversation. But there was really space held to say, how are you doing? And what do you need, right? And it wasn't about figuring out how I'm doing as a parent in order to increase my productivity, but figuring out how I'm doing as a parent, as someone who is a part of this village and community that we're constantly creating and that is constantly unfolding. And that there was a lot of power in that for me, right? As someone thinking about how to balance being a parent now and being like a worker in some ways. And so I believe that we all have the ability to create this community. And I know that it looks different for others. And so as I experience it on a daily basis, how do I open that space up? So I want to be able to just share that that it is possible because I have seen it. And I want to once again open up just to see if there's anything else that folks that's emerging for you when you think about just how we've talked today, or just what brings you joy, messages around mental health and wellness. I definitely encourage you all to bring it forth. Thank you, Jane. Jane is out of Kenya, so in a different time zone, it's always great to have you with us. And Jane also wrote that they currently have 50 circles of women across the country. That is beautiful, Jane. Thank you for sharing that. So much. That is amazing. I don't know if you want to unmute and share anything. I don't want to put you on the spot, but it's beautiful to hear about the work that you're doing in Kenya and the circles that you're having with women in Kenya, really tapping into what does it mean to be a woman in the country, engaging in restorative justice work to better the community. So thank you for that, Jane. Anyone else? What is emerging for you? What is coming up in this moment? Any questions you might have for our speakers? You want to go ahead and share, Jane?
Thank you, Jody. Always a pleasure to be in the circle of Black women. I love to be in your community, because in this community is where I get a lot of knowledge that I share with the women that I serve on a day-to-day basis. Always a pleasure. I learn so much, and I give it back as a way of service to the women that I serve. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you for always tapping in all the way from Kenya and coming to our circles and events and constantly supporting. So thank you for that. I see another question that just popped up in the chat. How do we build more trust in our communities to work and heal together? So I'll put it out to the group. How do we build more trust in our communities to work and heal together? I would love to hear. Someone just unmuted and shared. Go ahead and introduce yourself, and then I'll pass it over to Charles, whoever was just sharing.
My name is Harold. And I would say one of the ways.
You're breaking up, Harold. You're breaking up a little bit.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me
You're still breaking up just a little bit. Do you want me to pass it over to Charles and then pass it back over to you?
Yes.
All right, I got you. I'll pass it over to Charles, and then I'll pass it back over to Harold just to hear reflections.
Thank you for the question. What initially came up for me was start where you are. And what I mean by that, I think sometimes we think we have to save the world overnight. And like, start at home, start with your friends, start with the two friends, and again, build that sense of trust and accountability and let it expand. So as I mentioned, I'm part of the co-facilitator at Black Connect, and I'm really proud of the group because we've been able to form a sense of like connection and that we're beyond our monthly meetings. So when we're out and about, like, hey, how are you doing? We're doing our like mini check-ins even where I'm about, which I'm really grateful for. Because again, we're able to form a sense of trust and accountability. Like, I'll even admit, there was a situation last year at Pride where we saw one of our people who was a little too intoxicated, but we were able to rally and be support for him because, again, there was a level of support. Like, even though he only came to one meeting, but like, no, he's one of us, and we're gonna make sure he's taken care of. So I say start with where you at. Start with the people you have who's already in your current sphere, and if we keep doing that, have that sense of accountability, we can then change the whole social ecosystem.
Ashe, thank you, Charles. I'll pass it back over to you, Harold.
I can see. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, well,
We just lost you. We just lost one. I'll tap it back over to you, Harold. I know where you are, so I know why your signal's a
in the
little choppy.
community.
Go ahead now.
Huh?
You broke up for a second. Go ahead, share.
Oh yeah, this area I'm in is like bad with the signal. So that's one way I think that we can be able to do that. And I was just reflecting on what Max was speaking about earlier, as far as in the community, the lack of trust and the availability to talk to somebody that really is aware of the issues that is being presented, is because when you're living in a dysfunctional environment at home or in a community and stuff like that, it's hard to find somebody that you can be open to and vulnerable about, what you really are experiencing, thinking, and feeling. And so it's a challenge to find somebody that you can talk to. Some of the times we often choose the people we're surrounded by that's dysfunctional, and they give us dysfunctional advice and stuff like that. And then which cause us to really, pin stuff in and not allow ourselves to express what we really think and feel and get the help that we really need. I done some circles in the community, and I noticed that there was a lot of people that's in the community that was suffering, and some of them, the only opportunities they had to even speak about what was going on, within their mind and how they feeling was just through that circle. And that circle was just one that was just briefly held. And so I would say a platform like this, where people can be able to come and discuss these things, I think it would create some ideas that would open up some availability for people to get some health and wellness. And one of the things I would say, well, two of the things I would say to help me a lot was like music. Music have always been a best friend to me. No matter how I was feeling, when I find some good music, especially music that moved me, is that it made me feel better. It made me, think about things that really matter in life. Also, working out and exercise was another thing that helped me.
Thank you for that, Harold. Just acknowledging the gifts that we have as a part of cultural tradition, like thinking about the ability to move our bodies, right? And then I also acknowledge the piece around music. I think about throughout the civil rights movement, and the name is escaping me right now, but there was a choir that traveled to these different locations of different marches and rallies, really singing to think about the power of song to evoke the spirit and to move the spirit and to move the body, but it's just also offer it as a prayer of protection. And so really appreciate you sharing that. One of the things that I'll also say is thinking about the power of silence. And some of this already do this, like imagine like when you're on a FaceTime call with someone or a video call and you all are doing things in your own space, but just the comfort of having someone with you. Like I have a group chat with my cousins, and that's something that we do. We're just silent, doing our own thing, and just the power of sometimes being in space. And over time, I think that opens up the door to begin to approach maybe some conversations that you need to have. But just, I think first being with someone, or if you've ever sat with someone and you just allowed them to share things because it needed to be released, right, verbally. But the power in being able to release it is the silence that was offered to them, not to correct their experience, not to correct maybe the choices that they've made, but just being able to listen. And I think that's an opportunity to begin for folks who might not have access to these spaces or could be distrustful. Because I know for myself, I have access to so much language that I could be saying things to someone, they're like, girl, I'm not listening because it's just a bunch of words, right? And I might not recognize that because this is a part of my daily work. It's a part of my daily practice. And I might not be hearing them because I'm not creating space to truly listen, because I want to go towards helping them, right? Rather than creating a container where they can have autonomy to access the support that they need. And I think a lot of that comes sometimes just through silence. And I see this sometimes in my work, that we're in circle and there are moments of silence, and it might be a little uncomfortable at first, but then that's what emerges when people have the right to pass and they're still seen and they're still honored, even in their passing, and their desire not to have to unload everything. And so that's one of the things I would also offer. And that goes back to what Charles was saying, moving from just your group and recognizing that every action that we do has ripples. You'll be on this event today, and whatever you say and the way that you engage, that will have ripples and an impact on other people outside of that space. So really being able to honor and acknowledge that. And so I'll also, with that being said, go ahead and pass it over to Charles and then see if our other speakers have anything that they would also like to share.
I want to affirm something you just said. I remember when I was like doing my onboard and being a circle keeper, I was so nervous because I was like, well, what's someone share something I'm not ready for and all this. And I remember Jody was telling me like, sometimes you're just there to listen, just hold space for them. And I realized the importance of that. And kind of like we were talking about earlier, like just being that listening ear. So to respond to the question, sometimes just being again, that container, that space, because a lot of times we're in survival mode and that space is not, that's not available to us. So again, to really build that trust and also not abusing it. So like, don't be telling other people's business. So like another thing I love what I learned at RJOY, like let the story stay in the lesson leave. So again, just honoring confidentiality, being that like soundboard for somebody, and then not always feel like you have to like come and rescue someone. Just be that space.
Thank you, Charles. Anyone else? Jalecia, Max, anything else emerging and coming up for you?
I just wanted to mention one of the things, one of my mentor and friends, Loretta Ross, who is one of the founders of the reproductive justice term, they're celebrating the 30th anniversary this year. They have been celebrating. And one of the things that she mentioned in her experiences organizing over the last 3 decades, doing anti-rape work in DC, organizing against the Ku Klux Klan nationally, doing human rights organizing globally, doing reproductive justice and freedom work. One of the things that she mentioned through those experiences were, she said, when you are organizing with folks, trauma is going to be on the agenda. And you can spend a lot of time organizing, mobilizing, and doing important work, mobilizing resources, contesting the forces that are trying to kill us all. And you can do all of this work and trauma is still going to be on the agenda. So I always remember that because part of what she's trying to say to, future generations, current generations of activist organizers and care providers is, how do you be intentional that as you are on the route to liberation, that you're also not neglecting yourself? So I just appreciate this conversation. The type of work that we do necessitates such a deep, committed, consistent, relational form of care. And so I just love what's shared here about, and part of changing our entire ecosystem is being in community with each other, starting where we are. I'm like literally taking notes, honoring our confidentiality, leading with the the kind of the important lessons from what we're getting, and really being honest about where we're at and how we feel, and having space to sit still with someone in a world that often demands your constant productivity, your constant frenetic pace movement. So I just love that as people who are important care providers working on the front lines, doing important visionary forward-thinking work, organizing, caring for communities, experiencing multiple sides of marginalization, that we can take time and be very intentional about how we are tending to the important justice work on the agenda and the important trauma work that it's inviting us to contend with.
Ashe, thank you for that. Max, is there anything you would like to share? I'll pass it over to you as well.
I just wanted to share a thought that I had right quick, but being a kid, especially being a kid in an area like Oakland or somewhere where you would call the hood or the ghetto, being a kid and especially being aware of what's going on and seeing like a lot of the problem with mental health and being a kid is that people say we have a lot of resources, but we don't. And especially being a Black kid, that a lot of children that people might label as like bad kids in schools or any of this, it's a lot. I know a lot of people like that, and I know a lot of people labeled as that, and a lot of them are suffering from a mental health illness, and it is bad because they don't have the resources to go to a therapist, or they don't have the resources they don't have health, they don't have health care, like, you know, and it's terrible because they're labeled as a bad kid, where they might have terrible anxiety, you know, and but people are gonna call them weird, and people are gonna bully them, and they're just gonna see themselves as this, and it might lead to worse, and it's gonna lead to worse anxiety. It's going to lead to worse anxiety, and this built up stress and this built up pressure of seeing, you know, your mom worrying about if she's gonna have her house the next week because she can't pay the rent. You know, I feel like a lot of people don't really think about teenagers. A lot of people think that kids that's like 5 to 7 years old are the ones that really need a lot of attention and a lot of help. But to me, it's really teenagers that need the most, because we're going through a time in our lives where we're getting aware of people around us and the world around us, and we're finally able to see it is for what it is, and it's leading to a lot of PTSD, anxiety, and a lot of stress and a lot of pressure built upon us that we don't know how to deal with, and we might not have the resources to deal with it, because it's just not in our community, you know, and we just don't have it. We don't have it. And since we don't have this stuff, people are going to, I can't find the word, but you know when a doctor says you're this, but you know, I can't find the word. Y'all know what I'm trying to say. But like we're diagnosed. That's what we're diagnosed with, being weird, or we're diagnosed with something's wrong with him, you know? And I just I don't appreciate that. And I think that needs to change. But if I keep talking, I'm gonna start rambling. So,
but that was great. We love a good Max ramble. That was amazing. Thank you for that. And I think you're absolutely right. Like, we always, I believe, have to ask ourselves the questions: what are the voices on the stories, on the margins of the margins, right? That we always have to ask, like, who else needs to be at the table? Who else needs to be at the conversation, so that we can continue talking about this and we can continue leaning in. So I always appreciate the ramble, because I think that it's not a ramble. I think it's a gift, and you're providing us with a lot of knowledge and a lot of insight. And it makes me think about, as we're asking the question around mental health and wellness and care, it makes me think about, like, what does the preventative piece begin to look like? Because, and I think someone else also mentioned some of this in the chat before, that it is only at the brink that support is offered, right? But if we are creating containers and more places of safety, more places of joy, you know, I think about how sometimes there's a video, and some of you may have seen this if you've been in restorative justice training. There's a video, a community building circle video, and one of the questions is, the last time, you know, you remember being happy. And one of the young women in the video said that they didn't really remember. I think the last time maybe they were 6 or younger, and now they were a teenager, right? But there's an assumption that, well, you're a child, so like your life revolves around happiness and no stress. And like what you're saying, Max, like, young people are aware of the world around them, and they're also having their own experiences. And so I think about prevention is also being able to create spaces where people are not at the brink, and then someone says, I didn't even know this was happening, or how could this happen? And the reality is, we have to hold ourselves accountable as those who are aging and older, to be able to create the container of support, the container of safety, the container of love, the container for someone to share deeply and to say, like, life is hard for me as a 16-year-old. I mean, Jalecia knew me. Life was hard, child. It was a lot happening in life, right? And the beautiful thing is, once again, I had mentors who were like, let me sit down and talk to you. Like, I had a teacher, Miss Torres, that was like, listen, here's this book, The Bluest Eye. You're at a transitional point in your life right now. Baby, I'm gonna need you to read this book, right? That she saw what was happening. And I didn't have a language to talk about my experiences as a young person, because there were so many other people who are like, you're excelling, you're doing this, you're doing that. Yeah, I'm burying myself in extracurricular activities because it's hard to face the reality of the world, right? And that's real honest. But a lot of our young people are navigating in that way. And just because they appear to be doing well, because in many ways they don't have a choice, have to go to school, right? That we should still check in on the ones that appear to be well, and the ones that are also having challenges. So I appreciate you just sharing that, Max. And I think that's just a beautiful ramble, as you'll call it. But really, I think you're sending us a reminder to think about how to always create space and opportunity for people to be heard and people to be listened to, but also for people to be taken care of, because young people are also taking care of others, even if those aging folks don't recognize that they're having young people take care of them. So I really appreciate that insight. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you, Charles. And then before we close out, I'm going to tap in on a question that is really, really powerful. And once again, thank you to our amazing speakers for being here with us and answering the call when I sent that message. What's up? We're doing this and just being open and saying, yeah, I'm down with you. So I'll pass it over to Charles and then see if there's anything else that folks would like to offer.
Yeah, there's a couple questions in the chat, Jody. Maybe you can address after Charles.
I just want to say thank you again, Matt, because I definitely relate as someone in my 30s. As I'm going through my own wellness journey, I recognize a lot of the stuff that I'm navigating all stem from my childhood and being a youth and not like recognizing it. And it, what came up for me was the African proverb, when a child is not loved, they burn it down to feel its warmth. So it just makes me think to making sure we do prioritize the voices of young people so we can stop these cycles of unhealthy habits and behavior so we can, again, heal as a community. And another thing, like my own like personal metaphor, I always think about being mindful of is like the canary in the cage. For those who remember, like back in the day when the coal miners were in the cave, they have canaries. And if the canary died, that was a sign there was a gas and people leave. And so it makes me think like those who are most vulnerable around us, if they're not safe, then no one's safe. So just making sure all voices are at the table and being mindful of so we all can, again, heal as a collective.
Ashe, Ashe, thank you all so much. Jalicia, do you want to share anything?
No, I think,
Okay.
yeah, I've shared everything. This is a really beautiful space, and I really appreciate you, both Max and Charles, as well as the comments in the chat. Really appreciated the last two threads of the discussion around how, just processing. Like as soon as you mentioned that, Jody, I thought about high school us and just how much we had to navigate, literally straddling multiple worlds, literally straddling multiple authority figures, literally trying to figure out how to be whole and heal amidst dysregulation of a world that was literally breaking, while also trying to, while being lauded as, achievement and successful students, even the idea of who's viewed as deserving of like mentorship or extra care because they're doing well versus those who are not on the so-called constructed pathway of success, and like what that means for how we decide to invest in our young people, but also how we decide to, what that means for the implications for the path for our wellness and healing. So I just really appreciate the honesty of like giving us time to reflect on our younger self and also being in community with people who are literally navigating the sort of similar intersections of what we were feeling. And this is why we need intergenerational conversation. This is why we need like opportunities to like be each other's mirrors and also to reflect on the shared experiences as well as the differences. So I just really appreciate being able to have this across our generational differences.
Ashe, thank you. Thank you so much for that. And we'll close out with this question that I think is really important that Madeline raised about what would be the best learning and training opportunities for teachers, physicians, and mental health professionals who are not Black, but work with Black students and patients and want to provide better, more culturally responsive care. I'm going to drop it back in the chat so it can bump up, but just really thinking about like, what are the best practices for those who are not Black, who are in service to Black folks across the diaspora. And there will be some resources that I can also share in the follow-up email, but I would love to hear from our speakers or anyone else about just resources, best practices for folks who are not Black, who are in service with Black folks across the diaspora.
My first response is read anything bell hooks. Let's start there. There's plenty of options. Anything bell hooks.
And
in addition,
go ahead.
No, go ahead, Joy.
I was just gonna say, also thinking about having a circle of like white folks and non-Black folks, like affinity groups and affinity spaces are really important, because then it's not for the folks who have had those experiences to carry the weight of your reflection and conversation. And some of that is happening actually in Oakland and the Bay Area. There are cohorts of white folks and white teachers who are coming together to be able to have these conversations and have honest reflections that also move to non-repeat. Don't repeat the behavior now that you know that it ain't all right. I'm gonna pass it over to you, Jalicia.
I love that. Exactly what I was going to say is like shouldering the labor and not inviting constant, education or therapy or counseling. This is interesting because I was just having yesterday, Juneteenth, and I was just having a conversation with a colleague and friend, and who's also Black, and a white man approached us and asked us if we can educate him about Juneteenth while we had, our brunch in our mouth. And while the question was certainly innocent, it made me think about, well, who's this person in community with? And what does it mean to have affinity spaces where that labor of education can be shouldered? Because what if we just want to be Black well and navigate brunch and be great without having to constantly being sources of education about this historical, important historical moment and experience. So in addition to the infinity spaces, I would say there's a difference between allies and comrades and accomplices, right? And I roll with the accomplices and comrades, and I see a place for the allies. And I think as non-white folks who want to be in important partnerships, reciprocal, meaningful, justice-based, trust-based partnerships. I think two things. You have to do your own work and look at the trauma that you're bringing, the biases that you're bringing, right? And not just microaggressions, but straight aggressions, right? Because I think there's an idea of saviorship in this work. And I think that really undermines the potential and the radicalism and the important, meaningful impact of it. So unpack your own trauma and what you're bringing to those spaces so that they're not further exacerbated by whatever biases you're entering that space with. That's number one. And number two, I would say, in addition to accessing the resources so that you can educate yourself and accessing affinity spaces, look at your local sphere of influence, right? Like, where are those local spaces? Where can those conversations begin? It doesn't always involve going out into another community. It often involves sometimes just having those conversations with the folk who are around you, and those familiar relationships can be the hardest to have. So I think we should do the work where we are, and we be very intentional about the kind of relationships and partnerships we want to build with other people who are, as we're on different stages of this work.
Thank you, Jalecia. I would love to hear from you, Max. As a young person that I know people are often asking to speak and to be involved and engage, as someone who always is asking you to speak as well, I'm really interested in just what would you offer? Like, what are some things that folks can do who are non-Black but are serving Black students? What would be something that you would offer?
Okay, I'm already unmuted. All right. So for me, I really feel like a lot of Black children that I see that are close with their teachers, counselors, anything like that, those teachers and counselors are like a second parent to them. And they're able to go to them and confide, not with only their problems, but just going and talking to them and having a regular conversation like they're their friend. So just I feel like great educators and great healthcare workers are able to balance that life between being in that professional position, but also being a friend. And not just seeing me as a troubled Black kid, being able to look at me as a normal kid who's going through normal problems, and I could just be here for you, and not only be your therapist or counselor, but also be your friend, that I can come and talk to you about your day. And just if I'm having a bad time, I don't always want to be lectured, and I always don't want you to try and sort of help. I just want to I might just be having a tough day and just need a conversation. And that conversation is going to help way more than you trying to pierce into my brain. So I feel like a lot with working with Black children is being able to become a mentor and being able to become like a big brother, sister, or another parent to them. So yeah.
Ashe, thank you again to our amazing speakers. I think the essence of so much of what we've talked about is to be able to engage with folks as humans, that we are more than the worst thing that has ever happened to us, right? Or the worst thing that we've also ever done to others, to really think about how do we approach each other as humans and create an opportunity for an authentic relationship rather than trying to label or to save, right? That we have the gifts to be able to do that work for ourselves. And it is so much more powerful to do this work of healing and to do that work in community. And so that's just a reminder to all of us. Before I read a poem to close us out, just thank you so much to our amazing speakers, Charles, Max, and Jalicia, for accepting this invitation. I look forward to so many, many, many more conversations. There's so many ideas that are going through my mind. And thank you again, Dr. Jolly, for being here with us. I know you have to go pick up your daughter, but thank you for just giving your time and your energy to be in this space with us. And I'll follow up.
It was such a pleasure to be here, and I wish I could stay for the poem. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. And I'll send you the poem. I'll send you the link.
Okay.
All right. Thank you all so much. We will be sending, and I know I see one more hand, so I will pass it over to you before I close out. We're going to be sending an evaluation out to you that should take no more than 10 minutes just to answer a few questions, to be able to provide feedback. And then there'll also be an email with just any links and information that you might find helpful that will link to books and other things that just came up through the conversation. You will likely get that email tomorrow morning, just because I want to make sure we compile as great resource lists as possible. But thank you all again for being here with us. Before we close out with the poem, I think I saw a hand up, but now the hand is down. But I will open it. I think it was Ramses. Did you have something to share? I don't see your hand on my screen anymore.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just trying to share the love reaction.
Okay, no worries, got you. So thank you all again. I'm gonna close out with this poem. For the people who know me in community, I have read this multiple times just as a reminder, of our wholeness and our full selves. And so this is Adrienne Marie Brown's Radical Gratitude Spell. And I'll go ahead and read it to you, and I'll also send this in the follow-up email. And so she writes, "You are a miracle walking. I greet you with wonder. In a world which seeks to own your joy and your imagination, you have chosen to be free. Every day as a practice. I can never know the struggles you went through to get here, but I know you have swum upstream, and at times it has been lonely. I want you to know, I honor the choices you made in solitude, and I honor the work you have done to belong. I honor your commitment to that which is larger than yourself and your journey, to love the particular container of life that is you. You are enough. Your work is enough. You are needed. Your work is sacred. You are here, and I am grateful." Thank you all so much for being here with us, and big, big shout outs and love to CBHN. So grateful that you decided to partner with us on this event, and I look forward to hosting so many more events and gatherings with the California Black Health Network. In the follow-up email, we'll also share more information about them and their incredible work. And they also have a series of webinars and events that will be coming up. So when you get that email, click that link and sign up for their newsletter. So thank you all so much for being here with us again. I know some of you have questions about certificates and anything else. I'll stay on for a little bit and I will go through the chat. So thank you so much. And this is, I guess, the beginning of a potential webinar series, and it's beautiful to be here with you all and to have you as well.